So I want to talk about Packers rookie wide receiver Matthew Golden. And with him being a first-round receiver and being one of the first Packers first-round receivers taken in 20-plus years since about 2002, I think there were some expectations for what Matthew Golden could be coming into this season. And I thought there was potentially an outcome where he does become the Packers' leading receiver just because of what the Packers invested in him, just looking at his talent, what he did during his time in college. But so far this season, he's been good. I think he's been good as a rookie, but other guys have definitely outshined him in the receiving room. You're looking at tight end, you got Tucker Kraft leading the Packers in receiving yards currently with 469 yards, and you have Romeo Doubs second there at 350 yards, and then Matthew Golden is third at 253 yards. And I want to take a look here at what Jordan Love had to say today, or not today, I believe it was yesterday. He went on to the Kay Adams show and answered a question about Matthew Golden. So let me just read that first here and then get more into it. But Kay Adams was bringing up Matthew Golden and how fans sort of wanted to see even more from him. And she said, do you feel like that's crazy, or do you feel like we're just scratching the surface with him? And now let's read what Jordan Love had to say. No, for sure. I think people are just starting to see what we see in practice from MG every day. I know he's going to be a really great player in the NFL, and I think it's just early. We haven't found ways to be able to get him the ball as much, and some of that's where on me trying to find ways to get him the ball. Some of it's just on the plays, and we got so many different receivers and weapons out there that it's one of those things where it is hard to always get guys the ball. But I always tell guys, some guys will have a great game one day, and some guys might have a great day another day. So it's just you got to stay in that right mindset of coming in, working every day, and find ways to get better yourself. And as a receiver, as a tight end, running back, you never know when your number is going to get called. So you've just got to be ready to make plays when it does. But MG, I think we're going to keep finding ways to get him the ball, and he's going to have a great career here, no doubt about it. So thinking of Matthew Golden's entire career, we are still very early. We're very early in Matthew Golden's career, and it's not like he's done nothing. He's been productive, and he's had a few games, 50, 60 receiving yards, things like that, and he doesn't have a receiving touchdown up to this point, but he is currently the third highest targeted player in this Packers wide receiver room. And Love did say we haven't found ways to get him the ball as much. And so I think that because this Packers receiver room is so loaded, and you have so many different guys who Jordan Love obviously trusts, because if he didn't trust a lot of these guys equally, I think we would see a much higher target share for certain players. And of course, there are here or there. Romeo Doubs is targeted much more than the rest of the Packers receivers, but it's pretty spread out and pretty even across the board. And Matt LaFleur's talked about it in some of his press conferences where who gets the ball on a given day is really based off of what the defense is doing, how they're playing, this Packers offense and things like that. And so that leads to different guys having better days one day here or there, just as Jordan Love mentioned. He talks about how some days it's going to be one guy, some days it's going to be another guy. And I think that's one of the beauties of this Packers offense is that there's not one guy where defenses can say if we shut him down, we're going to have a good day. Where earlier on, when Davante and Aaron Rodgers were here, the Packers still had other good receivers, but because of who Davante was, because of the relationship Rodgers had with Davante, it was like we're going to feed him the ball as much as possible, which is very understandable. But I think the way the Packers built this offense is that they want to see it like this. They don't need to have one guy who is getting, one of the highest target shares, target rates in the NFL. And I just want to read this quote from Brian Gutekunst from January, which I think is sort of discusses this whole idea. But this is from a article written by Mike Spofford at Packers.com, January 16th. He says this: while acknowledging the offense was explosive at times and then hit some walls later, Gutekunst downplayed the idea that acquiring a proven number one wide receiver is a priority. He's more focused on the group in-house, despite the uncertainty of Christian Watson's 2025 season due to pending knee surgery, raising their games. Quote, teams that have one receiver that's super heavy with targets, that doesn't usually play out well for playoffs and success there, he said. We're looking for these guys that we have to currently to take a step into that role where they are more consistent on the down-to-down basis. So Brian Gutekunst wants it to be this way. He wants to have all these different receivers that are talented that, you're not having one guy getting a super heavy load of targets. And so I think this is sort of what the Packers have wanted to create. They don't need to have one guy that's head and shoulders over the others. And even though Golden isn't, exploding when it comes to his statistics overall, he's still a really, really good player. And I came across some data here from Fantasy Points data. They have a lot of good data on like route win rate and separation, things like that. And I was just curious to see what they have charted out here. And what I like about them is they do have like overall scores. So they chart every single, team so they can sort of rate it like that. But looking at a minimum 50 snaps for these receivers when it comes to separation score, so basically how good are you getting open, we have Dontavian Wicks 11th in the NFL. We have Romeo Doubs 28th. We have Golden 36th. Kraft 66th. The numbers are much different for tight ends. Heath 78th. And then versus man, Golden is much higher. Same with Wicks. Wicks 6th. Golden 7th. Doubs 38th. Heath 57th. And then versus zone, Doubs 41st. Wicks 48th. And Golden at 212th. So that's sort of surprising there to me. But the Packers seem to be very good against, man coverage. I mean, Doubs seems to be pretty, similar numbers for both. But it sort of shows you that if Golden's 36th in the NFL in separation score among all receivers, and the Packers have 3 guys in the top 36th, that's a pretty solid number considering, every team would technically have one wide receiver one, with there being 32 NFL teams. And so Golden, it's not like he's not getting open. It's not like he's not playing well and doing what's necessary. It's just that when you have so many guys, and you spread the ball out like the Packers do, it just the overall, receiving yards, passing yards, it just gets spread out a lot more thin. So that's why I feel like sometimes it's like we can't judge these receivers just based off receiving yards, because as I've said before about like a guy like Romeo Doubs, I think if he was on different offenses where they really looked his way a lot higher rate because he gets open so often, I think he would have much higher numbers. So I think that it always is dependent on situation and how much the quarterback trusts a lot of receivers, because I think that lots of times with Rodgers, early on in some guys' careers, he wouldn't necessarily target them at such a high rate because he had to build that trust with them. And it feels like Jordan Love does trust a lot of these receivers, including Golden. It's not like he's not targeting him. It's just that he's not targeting him at the same rate as Romeo Doubs. So those are my thoughts. That's what Jordan Love had to say. If you want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe down below, and I will see you guys next time.